Hi all, streaming to YouTube and to playchess.com server. Hi all, we're going to carry on looking at Fischer's road to the 1972 World Chess Championship. And the two games I'd like to look at today are from the candidates final. So this is against Tigran Petrosian, a former world chess champion himself. Fantastic player in his own right. So Fischer was really up against it here against Petrosian. I'll just mute that, and let's look at game one of the match. Hi all there on YouTube stream. So game one, Fischer played e4. So he was white against Petrosian. He played e4, and let's actually put on a Koperczak here. This is actually, I think, quite a tactical game. In fact, a very tactical game. Petrosian played c5, the Sicilian defence. We have knight f3, e6. So it's a very sharp variation of Sicilian, which we're going to go into open Sicilian. CD, knight takes, knight c6. In fact, Sicilian time, funny enough. So here, knight b5 was played, looking at that d6 square. So it looks a little bit like a Sicilian Sveshnikov a little bit here. What does black want to do about the d6 square? Well, d6. So we can actually transpose almost into a Sicilian Sveshnikov, but here we have bishop f4, and black played e5, and the bishop just went back to e3. So this is the most common. Knight f6. Now bishop g5, and here, yes, this is an opening I used to love playing with the black pieces quite a lot, the Sicilian Sveshnikov, and normally, a6. Well, with the knight on c3, though, it's slightly different because the knight can come to c3. It's a slightly different relative. Actually, it is actually a significantly different position without this knight on c3. So in a normal Sicilian line, a6, the knight going back, b5, but we've got the c3 square available to that knight. And in fact, a6 is not as popular here, possibly because of that knight being able to retreat to c3, as bishop e6. That's the most popular move, and that was played. And usually here, knight d2, it seems to be the move, and this is meant to be about equal. For example, knight d2, this is from Liebook, a popular continuation, this kind of thing, where I think in this position black's got a good piece play and the bishop pair. But Fischer's move here was actually knight 1 to c3, this knight to c3, with a6, and now white gives up that bishop pair. Bishop takes f6 to cause structural damage here, because if queen takes f6, then I think this is quite good. Knight c7, and then we take the rook. Knight c7 check. So g takes f6. Knight goes back, and here this apparently was a large part of Petrosian's preparation. This actual opening sequence up until quite some way deep in the game, actually. But there's a kind of surprising looking move played in this position. You'd think one of the points for white is that control of d5 here, but black liberates immediately his position by playing d5, funny enough. So it seems as though, how is this possible? It's a very, very clever move. I mean, how many of us would think about d5 here? If you were being honest, would anyone have considered d5? here. I just want to have some pause for thought here, because it seems as though white stops d5, and it looks like a relative of a modern kind of Sveshnikov, what I normally play with black a lot of times. But d5 actually being possible here is an incredible tactical possibility, it seems. But it's in line, but there's 6 games with d5 and only 2 with b5, so it is actually the most common move. So what is it doing? What is it doing? Well, it's attacking this knight. This bishop hasn't committed yet to g7, so if we can take this knight, and we can then c3 and then queen a5. That's the mechanism involved here. So e takes, bishop takes a3. No time to take here. Bishop takes b2. So white does best to do this, and now we've got queen a5. So black is not losing a piece or anything. In fact, this pawn now after queen d2 is pinned. Very aggressive, energetic play with the rook, pinning the pawn. So yeah, Fischer found himself in a very interesting situation. Black seems to be playing very dynamically and aggressively here, castling queenside very early on. What to do? Fischer's choice here was bishop c4. So bishop c4. And now black gets the other rook active, rook hg8, looking at g2. And now we have this move, rook d1. Okay, let's have a quick look at this position. Why rook d1? If castles, maybe this was possible as well, or not. Bishop h3, ouch. What do we do about this? We're going to have to lose the exchange. That wouldn't be too clever. So yeah, rook d1 for a moment. And here now, black plays bishop f5. So why not say a move like rook takes g2? In fact, I think it was here that it could have been preparation, and he was meant to play rook takes g2. I've been checking out some of the kibitzing on chessgames.com, and apparently, his seconds had prepared this, but he didn't play it, and he wasn't actually sure why he didn't play it. Maybe he had some mistrust of this position. Let's see, what does white actually do here on rook takes g2? Knight e4. What's the threat? Well, it's looking at the queen. If queen takes, rook takes, we've still got the falcon here. Bishop f5, knight g3. 2 pieces attacked. Knight d4. Rook takes. This might actually be better for white, this position. But let's try and improve that. This position apparently is okay for white. But hold on. Knight e4. There's an improvement here. You don't have to take on d2. Queen b6. And now what? Let's follow this. Queen e3. Queen takes. F takes. And here we can defend this with bishop g4, looking at d1. So this can't be taken as a rook takes d1. Rook d3, and it looks as though this kind of scenario is favourable. After all this, there's some long lines like this examined, believe it or not. But this kind of thing is great for black. So perhaps rook takes g2 does work. It's a long variation. Rook takes g2. So let's look at this again. Rook takes g2. Knight e4 hitting the queen. Don't really want to take there. Queen b6. We have queen e3. Queen takes. Bishop g4. Yeah, it seems okay. If the rook ever moved, then just knight e7. Fine, that's okay. this position again, d5 is a bit loose here, so this looks fine. But yeah, Petrosian, for some reason he actually played bishop f5, so it seems bishop f5 might have been inferior to rook takes g2, just technically, from post-mortem analysis that people have done since the game. So bishop f5, and now we have bishop d3. Okay, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, knight d4, and it looks as though this knight's quite useful, and this knight's a bit loose. White can afford to play castling kingside here. There's no little trick with queen takes and knight e2 check, because unfortunately this is check. So black actually here moves the king, so he's actually threatening now queen takes c3 and knight e2 check. So that's the threat that needs to be parried here, and white sidesteps his king away from this. He plays king h1, and at this point, move 20, it's actually about equal, so Fischer's survived. He's done something which maybe shouldn't have happened. He's castled kingside, g2 is protected, black's got some structural damage issues here. Okay, Petrosian takes one of the double pawns, queen takes a3. Let's have a quick look though. The end of the suggestion is rook g6. It looks logical to try and use the g file actually, to try and double potentially. Rook g6. And what would happen? Say rook b1. Well, we can double here. This looks like an interesting possibility. But anyway, yeah, we see queen takes a3 immediately. And yeah, it's an interesting position. How does white want to proceed here? Is black threatening anything in particular? I've just realised though I've missed the tactical nuance I should have mentioned. Can we just rewind for a moment? Let's go back for a moment to this bishop d3 move. Bishop f5, bishop d3. There was also another very important tactical possibility in this game of e4, because the king's still in the centre. But yeah, maybe knight takes hits the queen, queen takes f3. This is hairy stuff as well. But you know, maybe it seems maybe white can just about survive this. So anyway, okay. Sorry, diversion there. So queen takes, we get this position, queen takes a3. White now plays f4. So it seems this is activating the rook, trying to get to these pawns, get to the 7th rank, and trying to undermine the knight. It seems a very logical move in many respects. Just threatening just to take, and then rook takes f7, just very optimal use of the rook on f1. No major downside here with the diagonal or anything. Rook c8. Something has to be done. Knight e4, looking at the queen. But also this knight takes f6 on the cards. Queen takes, c takes. And it looks, yeah, the pawns don't look brilliant. But white is threatening knight takes f6 now. We have rook c2, threatening to take on g2. So white parries this with rook d2. Exchange of rooks. This position still, it seems technically might be fine for black at this point. Is this a slight slip up now at move 25? From an engine perspective, it seems like rook e8, it should be okay for black. Let's have a look at some of the dangers. This wasn't played actually in the game. f5 was played. Let's have a quick look at rook e8 here. If takes, we can take with the rook and hit d5. Takes, or even better here, instead of this, Rook e2. Here. Take on a2. This seems quite interesting for black. It seems as though black might be doing quite well here. Trying to get his pawns going. But yeah, that wasn't played. Rook e8 seems an interesting move. So instead we have this move f5. Possibly a tiny little slip up here. Now white plays f takes e5. After rook e8, white protects that pawn, and after knight c2, it seems, is white dropping this pawn? Does he have to move the rook away? Is it perpetual attack on the rook? Rook e2, knight d4, hitting the rook again. Rook e3, knight c2. The rook doesn't have to go back to e2 here. There's another possibility, and it's the one Fischer chooses. He rejects the kind of virtual draw offer for repetition. He actually plays here rook h3, giving up this centre pawn. And it looks as though the back row is a bit scary as well, with the king on h1. So what's going on here? Rook takes e5. Got to do something about e1. Knight f3 protects e1, hits the rook. Rook takes d5. And now rook takes h7, which means this pawn is now, in theory, quite a dangerous pawn to have. Rook takes d3. Immediately black is threatening the back row though. You don't really want to play knight g1. So h4 gives the kings h2 now, as well as progressing the pawn. So here there's actually a small advantage for white. Is it enough to win this position after all that? Has reached the position, you know, black technically a pawn up, but these are terrible, these are not so great, these double pawns. We have the move knight e3. And here white just takes on f7, so that not only getting out of the way, but also f4, we can just take on f4. Black plays check. This might have been a small slip up again. It's getting quite a difficult position for black to stay roughly equal. In fact, this h pawn is guaranteeing white greater prospects. It is actually a tricky position now, how to get behind this pawn. For example, I mean, let's imagine rook d8 to h8. Let's have a quick look at this. This, or here, it's a bit passive. King h3. We might be looking at knight d4 next. Protecting this one means knight d4. We can hit this one. Then we have two connected pass pawns. So yeah, black doesn't want to be too passive for the h pawn. So he plays check. Oh, someone's mentioned rook a3 as a question here. Let's have a look at rook a3. h5. Apparently this is a bit too slow for black. Taking h6. We're getting dangerous pawn here. Here, instead of this knight g4 check, we can actually play knight g1 here. So we've got h7. Here, g3 to stop rook h4. Then h7. Yeah, that's a piece up for white. So it seems rook a3 might be a bit too slow. Good question though. Rook a3 here might be a bit too slow. This h pawn is already pretty dangerous. So black actually played rook d1 check. After king h2, rook a1 to try and get this pawn with the king on h2. So that g2 would be with tempo. h5. And here, actually, it seems, yeah, rook takes a2 was rejected in this position. It's a difficult position. Actually, f4 was played. This is at move 36. f4 was played. If we look at rook takes a2 here, what is going on here? Why can't we do this? Just isn't that the idea? Okay, in this position, white doesn't want to play h6 because then knight g4 check all the time again to win that h6. White has knight h4 protecting g2. And okay, let's see. Say here, king h3. So now we're threatening h6 without knight g4, and this is difficult for black. This position, it starts to be a bit difficult. Or is it? Might be equalizing for black. This is actually quite good. All of a sudden, yeah, it seems as though, hang on a sec, h6 check, check, and yeah, we've got some problems. Maybe that was the way to play it. This could be the way to play it. So rook takes a2, h6, there's knight g4. But yeah, for some reason in this position, I think that is actually the best chance to play rook takes a2 here. But Petrosian maybe cracked up here at move 36. He played f4. Yeah, it's a strange one. Maybe a slight mistake to play f4, or a big mistake. Now Fischer actually just takes on f4, and there's a big difference. Rook takes a2. He's got various moves which give white a clear advantage. He plays rook e4 here. This h-pawn is just so dangerous. Knight takes g2. The king steps out of the way, and we're just going to be playing h6. Maybe on the approach to move 40, one has to assume, well, there's a lot of blunders in Grandmaster games on the approach to move 40 because players get very short on time. But this position is really critical for black, this outside h-pawn. Rook a5, and now just knight e5, again renewing the idea of h6. And also, of course, this knight's hanging. And here, Petrosian resigns. So at move 40, Petrosian resigned. And that made it 20 wins in a row Fischer had since the interzonal. And then winning 6-0 against Taimanov, 6-0 against Larson. This was the 20th win in the row. Unprecedented at this level of chess up until this point in chess history. This is the 20th win in a row. But yeah, it seems as though at certain moments here towards the end, even in this position, it seems, you know, the intention of rook a1, you'd think, is rook takes a2. I mean, is anyone... Who's surprised? I think it needs careful calculation to go with rook takes a2. Is anyone... Well, is anyone surprised rook takes a2 wasn't played? Or is it just... Am I just... It seems like a logical follow-up. I wonder... Let's have a quick look if we can determine the reason. White is not compelled to play h6. Okay. That's one thing. Let's try and analyse this a bit more. White's not compelled to do that. So we've established if h6 was played here, then check. Well, it doesn't want to do that. But knight h4 is also not particularly brilliant either. Rook a5, and black is now threatening f4 and rook h5. This might have been a defensive resource like this. There's knight g4. If we move the king out of the way, then rook a1. It seems, you know, that's an interesting defense coming up. But the one that might be critical here is actually king h3. Let's check out king h3. Rook a1. King h4. We might be in luck here with the h-pawn. The king is going well here to g5. So that would be dangerous for black. We don't want to go there. Check here. King g3. Rook g4. This position starts to be a bit dangerous for black. it starts to be a bit tricky. Rook e4 here. There's knight g4 all the time. Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be much higher resistance anyway than the game continuation. So yeah, f4 just seems to on this brief analysis, it just seems to be a blunder here. Move 36. I don't know if anyone knows the story about move 36 f4, but it seems to be a bit of a mistake. Now, the special significance of this game is it seems as though Fischer had refuted all the preparation, the opening preparation, the novelties of this game. If we look, it's like a very very sharp idea to play this outrageous looking d5 here, but it's possible because of bishop takes and then queen a5, and then casting queenside to pin the pawn. Yeah, very very sharp. So Fischer survived this, but on the other hand, apparently, he somehow didn't have trust in rook takes g2 here, which was prepared. So yeah, rook takes g2 would have stopped the natural castling. But if he didn't know the analysis intimately after that, it got pretty sharp after rook takes g2. So yeah, let's just quick look recap on that. Knight e4 hitting the queen. This position is okay for white, and on the other hand, black could improve with queen b6. So you'd have to know about queen b6, queen e3, taking bishop g4 on d1. Yeah, there's some very important tactical nuances, but black should have been doing a bit better than he did perhaps in that opening. So yeah, it seems Fischer managed to get an equal position in castle, and then later this f4, the outcome later was getting an outside passed pawn. This f5 perhaps is a little bit controversial as well. Rook e8 maybe a bit more accurate. So what we get here is this h pawn, and then our h pawn. This one winning the game from this position. This is the game winner, the h2 pawn. So we see some harassment of the rook, but winning the h7 pawn. Then we get the h pawn running. Yeah, and it seems this didn't help. Okay, a little bit of it's a game not too spectacular, but yeah, statistically interesting. 20th win in a row for Fischer. Now, this next game is so let's look at game 2 now of the match, and I have covered this on the channel. Actually, there's already a video about this game on the Kingscrusher channel if you want to look it up, but let's have a look at it again. It's a fantastic game, game 2. It's actually one of the more celebrated games of the match. Petrosian playing white, d4, and we have Fischer playing the Grunfeld defense, so which became of course one of Kasparov's favourites. Isn't it funny that Kasparov seems greatly influenced by Fischer? King's Indian, Grunfeld. So okay, so bishop f4, bishop g7. We have here the very solid move e3, now c5, and the most common move by far is to capture away from the centre. We have these rules in chess, sometimes you shouldn't capture away from the centre. Here it's very justified. White's now threatening cd. This is much more justified here in this position to just win that pawn. And we have queen a5, so there's about 800 games in live book here. Queen a5, very very topical. Rook c1, and players with black seem often to be playing d takes c4 here. That seems to be the main move. So d takes, for example, like this, is a popular continuation. I think, and it's slightly better for white. That's a popular continuation. we can see that the pawn structure is actually symmetrical here, which would favour black's drawing chances in theory. But in the game, yeah, we don't get a symmetrical pawn structure. This move seems more imbalances on the way in terms of pawn structure. Knight e4. So black's pieces are all looking at c3, of course, and it looks, you know, pretty dangerous, this c3. There's a particular way to handle this, which I guess is interesting to note. How would you handle this if you didn't know the opening theory? Well, if you do know the opening theory, white's play, what would you play? I'm going to post that question and give you 20 seconds. This is like a theoretical test, actually, more, because you might just know the theory here. But there's a move which is much more popular theoretically than what you might think. So what would you play here with white? Any ideas? Not queen d2, because knight takes d2. No. Okay, if we just defend what might seem a normal move to try and defend c3 in knight g2 is actually far less popular as a choice. Oh, someone's mentioned queen a4. Let's have a quick look at queen a4. Black can take e5. I think black's doing okay there. That's interesting. I mean, black might be doing okay, it seems. But it's an interesting move, yeah, queen a4. Now, I was wondering if you might have thought knight g e2 here. This is not so hot, it seems. I think so. Knight takes this position. Queen d2 here. This is okay for black, it seems. No, the move was actually to take out the d5 pawn. It's a clever little move to rebound this pin on the queen on a5. So knight takes c3, and we have this queen d2 pinning against the a5 queen, which was doing the pinning. So I think that's like a nifty bit of opening theory. Here, now, black usually takes on a2. If he takes on c5, this is there's a stunning move in this position which I can't believe, actually, which hasn't been played in Livebook, which the engine's picked up. In Livebook, I think someone's analysed it. It hasn't actually been played. You might think rook takes c3. No, we just take, right? So that's a snag. But wouldn't it be ideal to play rook takes c3 to skewer the queen and bishop? Okay, this is a sideline, bit of a theoretical exercise. But white's play here in a massive advantage. What would you play? It actually gets a big advantage in this position. So you want to play something like rook takes c3. What would you play here with white? Not bishop b5. Nope. Any ideas? It's amusing. I thought, what? Bishop h6. Yeah, just try and deflect the bishop away from c3. So if takes, rook takes e3, and we're skewering the queen and the bishop. And if castles, we can take on g7, rook takes c3. This is nice for white. This position is nice for white. That's interesting. So anyway, yeah, theory dictates, it seems, in this position. So it's pretty sharp. That queen takes a2 is the move. Queen takes a2. And now b takes c3. Black doesn't want the exchange of queens here. He wants to get his c5 pawn back, for instance. Bishop c4, letting black, if he wants to take on c5, this is going to be quite good for white now. White has, it's a very, very interesting position structurally. Fischer played knight d7 here, which might be technically a little bit better than taking on c5. Knight d7. c5's going. Now we have knight e2. Now possibly here, taking on c5 is interesting to consider. In my book, there's been a few games, apparently about 11 games, with knight takes c5 here. And I think black doesn't stand too badly here. This position, black doesn't seem to stand too badly. But yeah, Fischer chose a more adventurous move here. He actually played knight e5, and maybe he was expecting the bishop to drop back. Just keep the bishop, you know, on the diagonal, and something like this. Yeah, maybe he was expecting that, which might be okay for white as well. But a little bit of a surprise, perhaps. Petrosian gave up voluntarily his dark square. Sorry. No. Yeah, pardon me. It might be surprising that this is strong here. I mean, but so we have bishop a2. We do actually have bishop a2, but still with the possibility of bishop takes e5. Black played bishop f5. And now, yes, the bishop is given up voluntarily, which might have been a surprise. Bishop takes e5. Knight d4 gains a tempo, threatening knight takes f5 with structural damage, among other things. But also significant is c6, just to keep that pawn. So I think that's the more significant thing, to try and keep that pawn. So queen takes c5, accepting a bit of structural damage. And yeah, Petrosian's emerged here with a good advantage from the opening, but it is opposite coloured bishops. You might think, okay, there's structural damage, but there's a passed a pawn. There's swings and roundabouts here. White castles. We have queen a5. So why queen a5? Hold on a sec. Why not queen here, for instance? Looking at h2. Maybe f4 is good here. This seems pleasant enough. Bishop b1. We can start torturing things like f5. So queen a5 was played. Now f5 is kind of weakness in black's position, actually, and it's targeted immediately now with queen c2. Of course, e6 is out of the question with this bishop lurking on that diagonal. So f4 is played, and this is really an interesting position here. Instead of f4, I mean, it's actually a really difficult position after queen c2. Petrosian didn't want to play e4 here. This natural looking e4 might not be as good as what was played. If he plays e4, black could castle and maybe have a pleasant enough game. This is a nice dark square blockade. The dark square bishop looks fantastic. This looks very, very comfortable for black. No, Petrosian refuses that blockade scenario here. This is where he does something extremely interesting. C4. Just with the idea of snuffing out the C5 blockade square. And you might think, well, can Queen C5 be played here? This is interesting, but it might not be tactically so brilliant. Queen C5. The E4 square hasn't been used by a pawn. Queen E4, Bishop D6, E takes F4, and there's no significant blockade here. This is better for white in any case. So yeah, there's actually a positional pawn sacrifice going on here to deprive black of C5. Fischer took on E3, and again Petrosian doesn't want to take here because we'll get this horrible blockade if takes Queen C5 blockade. This might be tenable for black, this sort of thing. No, we see in fact after F takes E3, C5, just pawn sack. He's got pawn mobility. He's taken away C5 from black. Very, very interesting. Black has all sorts of issues here. If he castles, then this diagonal is immediately dangerous. So, I mean, let's have a quick look. If black castled, Fischer actually played Queen D2, but let's have a look at castling. Bishop B1, F5, F takes E3, with threatening rook takes. It's not so pleasant for black. Yeah, so yeah, maybe Fischer wasn't so enthusiastic about that. So he actually plays Queen D2, like tactical move, Queen D2. And now, and with this move, black forfeits castling. Queen A4 check. The king's being forced to move. An incredibly powerful move. Now, black is threatening E takes, where there's no rook takes because of Queen takes C1. So we have rook C D1. The Queen is protecting the D1 rook. Queen E2. And with Queen E2, although black's only got two pieces out, it seems Queen H5 and then E2 forking both rooks is something you'd want to consider, that black is threatening here. And this is real genius of the game, because what has happened so far is this kind of genius pawn sacrifice to lift the blockade and liberate this bishop on the diagonal. But now this is absolute genius with D6, supported by the rook on D1. I mean, I think this is like one of Petrosian's best attacking dynamic games. He's actually allowing what seems to be a devastating forcing move on the surface of things. But I think in our own chess, when we're faced with these seemingly horrendous forcing sequences, sometimes you have to bear in mind, if it's not totally forced, you can sometimes slip in a positional sacrifice. So is there a positional sacrifice on the cards here? Because Queen H5 is now threatening, crudely, to mate the white king, and also E2, it would seem, to fork both rooks. But there exists a move here, or two, in fact, or three. There's actually several good moves for white, but one of them was played. What would you play here? So you're faced with E2 and the mate. It seems technically a very, very interesting position, because actually the black king isn't that safe with the bishop on this diagonal. It turns out actually there's at least two or three good moves here, but Petrosian chose one of them. What would you play here with white? White play. If I give you 20 seconds, starting from now. Actually, free moves seem to lead technically to an advantage. The brilliant move played was actually f4. Incredible. Yeah, because it invites e2. But as I say, we don't have to always listen to our opponent. We can make this a positional sacrifice. And yeah, f takes, just treating it as an exchange sack. This position is really dangerous for black at move 26. But before we move on to that, that's the game continuation. And this is actually really dangerous. The queen is holding on to the rook. We've got these pawns here. We've got this fantastic bishop. The king's stuck there. The rooks are not connected. But before we move on from there, technically it seems that even f takes e3 or d takes e7, this looks interesting. F takes e3 is on f7. Queen takes, king f2. So that giving the king f2. And this is a dangerous position for black as well, it should be noted. This position here, queen e4, this is pretty dangerous. The king's not that safe. There's things like rook h1, rook d7. This isn't too good for black either. Yeah, but f4 is another brilliant move. There's some brilliant ideas in this position against this e2, it seems, and more than one. But taking on e7 as a prelude seems to be pretty strong. If the king had taken here, rook d7, rook takes f7. Yeah, that's pretty horrible. Queen takes, bishop takes. Yeah, that's the end of game there. So yeah, but yeah, the Petrosian's move is absolutely brilliant as well. f4. So he goes into this virtual exchange sack. But what else? Possibly more solid might have been bishop f6. White's still in the driving seat here. Okay, white will be faced with e2 for sure. Rook d5, we can hit the queen. D takes. We've got this trump card here, this light square diagonal. So threatening rook d8. This should be fun for white, basically, this position. But yeah, Fischer goes for the material. So e2, he goes for that material. So we get this aforementioned position, which is difficult for black indeed. He grabs the centre pawn, which seems a logical thing to do. Queen takes e5. But we've got this semi-open file against black's king. That's immediately used with rook f1. So threatening a mate in 3 actually, starting with rook takes, and then queen g4 check if the king went over there. It's like a mate in 3. The queen is eyeing e8 here, so rook takes f7 has to be dealt with. Not too many choices for black here. I think they all pretty much fell. Fischer chose f6. On f5, I don't think that helps particularly. Queen b3, queen c4, like the game. So f6 was chosen. It's just very, very difficult to defend this position. These pieces are all conspiring against the black king here. We have a very simple double attack, well, simple looking double attack, threatening mate, and also some other pretty dangerous stuff. What does black want to do about that? We plays king g7, and yeah, these 3 attacking pieces, and this pawn is like a 4th attacking piece now off the check. D takes e7, keeping black out of the f8 square, and this one's dropping. the black king has had it. It's gone. F5. Rook takes F5 because the rook can come with the queen to protect F1 if there's a back row issue. So Fischer didn't bother with queen E1 check here. Just simply rook F1, and then we're back to that later. It's lost. He plays check. After king H1, Fischer resigned. He's actually faced with rook H5, checkmate, for example. He can try and delay things here with queen D1 check. But when the queen moves again, then rook F6 check is crushing. We're just going to win the queen if nothing else. And mates soon after, of course. Yeah. I thought this is one of Petrosian's most brilliant games. And so he, was capable still of this brilliant chess, the former world champion, Petrosian. By the way, someone's asked, when do you know if streaming live? I think there's a tab on my YouTube channel which indicates streams coming up. I did mention 2-3 days ago. I assigned this event. If you look on my events, it was a few days ago. Sometimes I do that a few days in advance. Now, okay, this sort of game makes a big impression because, like the lifting of the blockades, it's like, in some sense, our pieces all want to be liberated. Our pieces all the time are seeking liberation, but we're held back by material concerns. If we look at the dynamic play, I mean, first of all, capturing away from the centre and being exposed to this, free treble pressure on c3. This was a little bit neat, I thought, just from a theoretical point of view. This rebounding of the pin, and it seems here that the doubled pawn is also acting as a key blockade square in this position for black. So that's probably, black should try and get that c5 blockade square. I think it's virtually unheard of for white for ending up with this pawn there, with this bishop being good on this diagonal. It's just an unheard of thing. I think what happened here with Fischer maybe experimentally played knight e5. So the usual thing is to just take on c5 in this position. There's 12 games in live, but just taking on c5 and facing this position, it doesn't seem entirely that bad. Well, especially compared to the game continuation. So this has been seen before. E5, this sort of thing, where it shouldn't be that bad for black, even if black has to accept a miserable pawn. White's got a miserable pawn here. That sort of thing, that's been seen before. So taking on c5 is like the routine move. So it's as though this was an opening experiment or something, not to be repeated. Knight e5. But our pieces want to be fundamentally liberated. So what was done was actually really clever stuff, because the prelude bishop a2, as though bishop takes e5 is not on the cards, because why not just play it immediately? If it's going to be played, why not just play it immediately? That's interesting as well. But yeah, bishop a2, and in fact waiting for bishop f5 is an interesting idea here, because of this tempo gaining. If knight d4, so he'd given up the dark squared bishop. If knight d4 without giving up the dark squared bishop, there's knight d3. Yeah, that's the point. Knight d3 check. Oops. So yeah, he takes off the knight just to gain a key tempo with knight d4. And if queen takes c5 hasn't been played, let's look at this. If say bishop d7, then we've actually got c6. This is pretty dangerous for black. I think there's a lot of pawns here which haven't been taken, and it's getting a bit tricky for black. So this is the point after knight d4. that yeah, c6 might actually be a significant threat, as well as knight takes f5. So Fischer chooses to allow knight takes f5. But what we get here is, you know, these double pawns, and this bishop is great on this diagonal. It seems as though it's a really dangerous position if black had castled kingside here. But now we get like queen c2 is marking a big advantage here. Queen c2, f4. Yeah, white doesn't play e4. This would be a gigantic positional mistake, in fact. The very opposite of what white wants to do, to play e4. It seems like a move like e4 gives black all the blockades that he really wants on the dark squares. I hope everyone sees that quite intimately here, that e4 is a terrible positional move. Does everyone see that? e4, terrible positional move, if that was played. Does everyone kind of see that? Because you're giving black the c5 blockade, and this bishop is just going to be a prisoner potentially to both this pawn or this pawn. So if we look at just the dynamics of the bishop here on a2, we're just locking in the bishop either via e4 or d5. If we have this blockade position, this bishop is without like prospect, and this bishop's just sitting on a fantastic blockade square on the dark squares. And not only that, you know, there's a passed a pawn here. So this looks to me to be like that would be a terribly positional like disaster move, to play e4. Instead, you know, what was genius, you know, is this idea that you want to play c5. You want this bishop playing a crucial role, in fact, on this diagonal to hit f7 later. So look at the bishop on a2. It wants to be liberated. And in fact, we've kept the e4 square for things like queen e4 here. So yeah, we see, you know, this bishop actually winning the game. This is like you know, the centre forward in football. This bishop later, it wins the game. It's the attacking piece on the diagonal. And of course, black is also weaker on the light squares. He's only got the dark square bishop, so if we can get something going on the light squares, you know, that's where black's really kind of hasn't got the light square bishop. So yeah, but it requires a temporary pawn sack, followed by soon after an exchange sack. We get this exchange sack now. d6 opening up that bishop. This is really the key piece, it seems here, because then we've got battery opportunities, you know, to look at b7 and f7. So queen h5. Yeah, this bishop's now worth just as much as one of these rooks. We want our pieces to be at maximum potential and potentially coordinating against the opponent's king. That's an ideal form of coordination, piece coordination. And so it was all achieved by the game continuation, where, okay, white loses the exchange, but yeah, all the pieces are coordinated. The bishop's fantastic on the diagonal, and the attack is just unstoppable, in fact, on the light squares. This is completely lost position here. So we saw that black's just in meltdown because of batteries like this. If, I mean, like e6, that doesn't help. e6, queen takes b7, with the idea of here, say here, then these pawns are pretty good. c6, and the pawns like are crashing through. If takes, rook takes f6, you know, this sort of thing is slaughter time as well. So there wasn't much of a defense after this. I remember analysing this, you know, in some detail. There's a YouTube video as well for this particular game, but it's defenceless now. But you know, from a positional perspective, what has white done? White's kept his pieces really active and liberated. So the attack crashes through. So yeah, one of my favourite games of Petrosian against Fischer. So that put an end to Fischer's 20 wins in a row. That was his first loss for ages and ages. I hope you got something out of that. and comments or questions on YouTube. Okay, have a good week in chess. See you next week. So we'll carry on looking at games 3 and 4 next week. Okay. Thanks very much.